The art of the mind game. Competing at a high level in a large pool of players invariably manifests the mind game. A cornerstone element to our futility as a species, the mind game hilariously springs up frequently in consciousness much the same way each generation initially thinks it invented sex. Whether you're a top player or aspiring to be, most everyone has employed the mind game at some point. The mind game is often practiced by those who understand the stakes, and in this pithy essay I will attempt to describe what can happen when the mind game is employed amongst a group of people with varying perceptions of what the stakes actually are. One of the most common forms of mind games in the elite comes in the form of hoarding. Hoarding is the act of acquiring personal bests on various individual levels and/or full game runs and then not posting those runs publicly until some time later, usually chosen by the player hoarding the times. If you are an aspiring player, then more likely you'll use hoarding as a means of ascending the rankings more easily, as your rivals won't know how hard you're working, eventually causing them to lose attention to your efforts as you freely ascend the ranks once on hoarding the times. It works great because it's a mind game, the rivals' perception of you is skewed, and so creates a means of attack. Real Sun Tzu type stuff. If you're a top player employing the mind game, then it's more likely a means for rank preservation. There's not a top player in any sport in the world that would accept declining rank while in their prime and active. Context is everything, and the players of the mind game know that. Like many speed gaming communities with their own terminology, the elite has a nickname for the act of grinding or the act of getting a PB, cooking. For a run to be cooked is for it to be fast as FCK. The term can even be applied to developing strategies behind closed doors. From this lens, cooking, and the elite's type of cooking that is really what it comes down to, what strategies you're employing, and what you show to the public. In this way, cooking can be a mind game itself, so it's easy to see why in the elite it's so valued and emotionally charged, because cooking happily can become a victim of the mind game, and it works. To diminish another's reason to play is the point of the mind game, and hoarding conveys that. Now, hoarding itself can take on many forms and create different types of consequences, like it can in the elite. One dynamic hoarding certainly had a relationship with was the order in which untied world records are honored depending on when they are posted/unhoarded. Should the rankings give more weight to date achieved in terms of keeping the rankings history and achievements accurate under this perspective? Or should date posted be given the privilege of untied history and achievements, leaving hoarders to decide whether to tempt fate in the eyes of GoldenEye history under this stance? Guess what the mind game would have? The path of least resistance. And where does that lead? To the former. It is entirely more desirable to have the ability to manipulate other players' expectations and perceived reality. The former mode of weighing data achieved more valuably creates an anti-competitive situation where the best players can use it to stay at the top, and in doing so often negatively affect the motivation of others with their own hoards. There's another aspect to data achieved being valued higher that will always be relevant to the discussion in terms of the community's functional security, which is something I'd like to call the Death Star scenario. In Star Wars there's a man-made robot planet called the Death Star. Its only weakness in terms of blowing it up is a tiny hole in a vent shaft on one side of the thing. If missiles are fired into the shaft correctly, boom. Now in the elite, under the system of data achieved being valued higher, the vent is the proof mods, the Death Star is the community, and the missiles are faked runs whose splicing is undetectable, causing them to be taken at face value, and years later when they are unhoarded they destroy years of legitimate history between real competitors. Someone might already be hoarding this missile. The incentive to fire these missiles is built into the data achieved ideology, and the mind game knows that. Now, for the stakes. To understand the elite and one's place in it is to understand what's at stake. The reality is this: all of us that can participate in this community live in societies. These societies have given us enough safety to do things that are quite fantastic, such as playing a video game. It can therefore be reasonably assumed that a community centered around playing video games is a low-stakes experience. To prove that it's low stakes involves asking simple questions, like, do you know that you're going to eat tomorrow? Or did you grow up in an environment decent enough that it allowed you to make choices? Knowing that it's easy to prove how spoiled many of us are in reference to those far less fortunate, I feel I don't need to further prove the point, that the elite is a low-stakes activity, which adds to its fun. Everyone has different ways of expressing that the stakes are low, and the mind game depends on knowing the stakes. Take Irie for example. Throughout the date achieved weighted versus the posted weighted debacle, not once did Irie lose his temper or express slighted anger towards anyone involved in what was going on for his history and championship achievement being jeopardized. This is because in addition to Irie being a patient, upstanding individual, he understood the stakes were low. Even some community members expressed anger and frustration at the situation, but some decided not to increase their magnitude of complaints because they knew the stakes were low. Now, let's zoom all the way out to general human behavior really quickly. What happens when some community members in a given community believe that the stakes are high when they're actually not? Well, let's catalog a few byproducts. Some leave the community in frustration or sadness. Some dwell in anger and hold grudges. And then, some members take advantage of the situation and proceed to act on others' perceived ignorance. With what follows, I'm not trying to disrespect anyone, but I am certainly trying to make fun of some people. Because it's important to make fun when the stakes are low, and the time travel mess is a great example of a situation that deserves it. Also, with all due respect, I'm not privy to all the ins and outs and realities to everyone's relationships, so bear in mind this is purely what it looks like to me from a distance, with some fun embellishments. A passionate and talented rankings administrator earns a ton of respect of the community after joining and doing lots of administrative work fleshing out the history of GoldenEye speedrunning. This admin proves themselves to be a valuable asset to any community for the dedication devoted to such a niche community. What also happens at the same time is there are a couple philosophies employed by them that are rubbing community members the wrong way, one being the belief that the elite's ranking and world record history should reflect what actually happened in real life, with backdating as the tool. As described earlier, this method can inadvertently and accidentally create a Death Star situation by means of a hoarded faked run. Meanwhile, a top player picks up on this philosophical difference. This top player realizes that, amongst the many options they have for rank preservation, there's an opportunity to take advantage of the philosophical choice the passionate ranking administrator has made. Humiliatingly, the top player knows that the ranking administrator is going to err on the side of backdating history regardless of date posted. The top player also knows that the ranking administrator is oblivious to the top player's actual plan, which is to employ the mind game at a very, very high level without the knowledge of the administrator. Top player proceeds to hoard, casually notifies the administrator that they're hoarding and then does nothing, following top player's communication slowing to a halt. The mind game has been deployed. Again to demotivate others from playing, this time the elements of the Death Star scenario have allowed for top player to take advantage and play the mind game at the highest level. Top player knew that they were smarter than passionate rankings administrator. They knew the administrator would stick to their chosen philosophy, forcing the administrator into having no choice, in their mind, but to keep up with backdating, frustrating the administrator at the shitstorm they know is coming. Under their bespoke reasoning, top player sized up the situation and passionate rankings administrator correctly, and knew they would not deviate from that philosophy. And since top player knew exactly what they were doing the entire time, their sizing up of the situation works seamlessly in their favor. Yoris, I have a lot of respect for you. And frankly, I want you to stay in the elite forever for the value you've added. I would also enjoy if you wanted to visit me in Nashville sometime. We could get some hot chicken or whatever we're into. I think so highly of you that I'd even introduce you to my friends and family should you want to meet them. But my man Yoris, I wouldn't be a good community member if I didn't point this out to you as my friend. You got played, and you got played good. In the interest of restoring our strong and hilarious community to its proper excitement, it doesn't feel good, but I have to give you tough love when I say welcome to the jungle. No pun intended, your jungle runs are nuts good. Now it won't do us much good wondering what the motivation for playing the mind game at such a high level was, but I'd bet money that, from top players' perspective, it was a low stakes venture the way they saw it. And in keeping with the paradoxes that make up life, they were right. There was really only one person in this scenario who thought the stakes were high, which contributed to creating the stressful situation that you've had to endure for so long, which I regret has been so stressful for you. I've got real sympathy for you because I've been there. But sadly, my friend, that person was you. Now, to get back to the embellishments and making fun of people, let's look at the shadowy grandfalloon that enjoys wreaking havoc in the precious ways they can manage. We'll call the first three of these entities Joe Rogan, Elon Musk, and the Illuminati chef, making up the group Clever Spoiled Special. The Grinch is also going to make an appearance. Being that CSS concerns itself primarily with employing the mind game, it is a volatile group with resentment and schisms built into its life cycle. The purpose of the group is rooted in using the mind game to demotivate others. But what's unique about CSS is the lingering flavor of high-level resentment. Some of them feel they have been wronged, and therefore efforts to hoard are often more emotionally charged with gaslighting, revenge and other precious chaos. Allowing the brain to manufacture this type of low-stakes chaos and gaslighting encourages that brain to continue doing the same. Unfortunately, what the brain won't realize is that its value system has become polarized towards feelings like resentment and revenge. And then the brain won't realize when it's continuing to do that in real life. Relationships get harmed, opportunities wash away, and a litany of other negative effects materialize that won't be realized sometimes until it's too late. Through hardship self-imposed and others that weren't totally deserved, CSS learned to value more getting what they want. Sometimes they value being right regardless of your feelings. They've even at times justified living the rest of their lives alone to serve their ultimately broken and selfish goals. Knowing full well the disregard for respect, knowing full well their pursuit towards infamy, knowing full well they won't get laid next year, they continue, as if we're all not going to die one day. So one or several of them decides to manipulate the rankings administrator, poisoning the admin's disposition to be more like them, and luring the administrator into becoming this. Should their attempts at high-level gaslighting succeed, the rankings administrator is then in danger of becoming this. And once this happens to the broader community, then this becomes me. Just kidding, that has nothing to do with any of this. But also it wouldn't surprise me if the Illuminati chef is constantly plotting to defect from any associations at a certain point, when there's nothing left for him to benefit from, turning on Joe and Elon as well. Because again, the Illuminati chef believes the stakes are low, when the others might not. Folks in self-destructive groups like these can often be very predictable. I'd like to give a little more love to Joris. I truly do understand why it's important to him that the rankings history might reflect real life. It makes sense on paper. And maybe if it didn't cause ancillary issues like the Death Star scenario or upsetting history so much that Dinos raise eyebrows as to the core of the community, we might have thought it was the best idea. He really did think he was doing the right thing for the community, and for that I respect him even if the approach was compromised. For date posted to be weighed heavier in terms of prioritizing posting does many important things, but the most important thing it does is ensure fun. In this situation there is a right and a wrong way to pursue the issue. The right way creates fun, the wrong way destroys it. And the wrong way is to believe that the video gaming this community does is a high-stakes experience, which it is not. This brings to light that the elite is the type of community that exists because of several perspectives existing at the same time. The perspective of existing in and of itself, and grander human perspectives that include the elite as one element in the full soup of life. The date-achieved approach has proved that there's more that makes a community than just the community itself. With regards to hoarding, we know there's no stopping it. But this doesn't have to be a problem. As long as we're safeguarding the aspects of this community that make it fun, we'll be all right. Really, I think we've learned a lot. This whole situation was in a way the product of inexperience subconsciously asking the question, what makes this community so fun and so great? Curiosity, after all, is the foundation to a happy, self-actualized life. We got there one way or another, and we should all be proud. I want yours to take himself out to a pub, get himself a beer, and think about how great the future is going to be. He deserves to take a load off, and deserves some sympathy for what he's been through. It's a complicated situation. Let's eat and cook.